Well, we continue the conversation here with Siphile Hlwatika, who's an associate of ENS's Africa's Employment Department, specializing in employment law. We're talking about, this idea of being able to disconnect, at least from your office, and not have to respond to your calls or SMSs from your bosses. Siphile, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Cathy. Thank you for having me, and good morning to our listeners.
So, it looks like a very attractive idea. Firstly, let's talk about how Portugal has gone about doing it.
Well, the right in Europe, or essentially, I think let's first explain to our listeners what the right entails. Like you have just put it now, as a result of the increase in digitization and remote working most recently, employees have been working from home mostly. Now, what this right essentially entails, it entails employees being able to disconnect from his or her work or refuse to engage in work-related communications, emails, as such, during non-working hours. Now, it first came about in France in 2017. They were the first country to enact the law concerning this right to disconnect. And since then, other European countries, as you mentioned, Portugal as well, there's Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, and Canada have also considered, proposed, or adopt such a right. But most recently this year, the latest country was Ireland, where they have published a code of practice for employers and employees on the right to disconnect. So it is quite popular in the European countries, but there are some other Asian countries, such as the Philippines, which have considered adopting the right as well.
So just to understand, Siphile, you are saying that the context under which it happened is due to companies moving more and more into the digital space, where a lot of work is being done online and not necessarily through the physical presence of people in offices.
Yes, that is true. The advent of COVID-19 has contributed greatly to this right to disconnect being brought back into the spotlight. It's been around for a number of years, but the pandemic certainly in the European countries has triggered conversation in countries having to enact legislation to give effect to the right.
I suppose in many ways it is necessary because people want to be able to control their time. And where you have this remote working, oftentimes people are getting email at any times of the day, and emails rather at any time of the day, and they're expected to respond. But if your normal working hours are 9 to 5 and you're getting an email at 7:30, I would imagine that part of what this disconnect legislation allows you to do is to only respond tomorrow morning when you're back at work.
Yes, well, that's in certain countries, yes. Like I just mentioned now for you, in Ireland, for instance, the Irish code is not actually a law, but it's more like codes that we have in South Africa as well. What the code requires is for employers to provide specific information to employees about their working hours, and to ensure that employees are aware what their usual working hours are, reasonably expected to be, and to ensure that employees take rest breaks. So what the Irish code recommends for employers to do is that they should adopt policies where emails should be sent during working hours, except for in exceptional circumstances. And then when employees do send communications at times which may be inopportune for other employees, the sender should perhaps consider the timing of the communication to avoid disruption and the like. But in South Africa, that is a different question. Obviously, each state has its own laws to abide by. South Africa has not considered adopting this sort of right. In fact, it doesn't exist. But the BCA, which is the legislation which regulates working hours, could be a guiding point to start to see how this right might be applicable. But as things stand in South Africa, the right is not in place. But it could be considered that the right, for instance, employees do have the right to fair labor practices in the Constitution. That could be interpreted to extend the right. But the problem is that the labor legislation, which is adopted to give effect to the Constitution, does not expressly extend the right. It just provides piecemeal protection to those employees who might be vulnerable if that's the correct word to use.
Let's talk about what would be needed to make this sort of code, a labor code of practice, as you describe it, possible in South Africa. Where would we need to begin?
Well, obviously, there need to be a conversation between government, trade unions, NEDLAC, because that's where, obviously, when codes of good practices are considered being implemented, there needs to be a consultation process. But we need to first look at the practicality of it. Is it practical in South Africa? Is it a viable solution? I mean, in South Africa, for instance, most large corporates and multinationals do explicitly state in employment contracts that, listen, as an employee, you are expected to work. If you earn above the threshold, you are told that as an employee there will be an expectation for you to work ordinary hours for no additional remuneration. But is South Africa, the question then arises, is South Africa ready to have this right? And my assessment is that a simple blanket prohibition on communication outside of regular working hours might not be the viable answer, especially in South Africa, which is attempting to compete with other developed countries. The issue of working hours, if you look at a report that was published in 2017, which considers which countries have, on average, the most working hours in a week, South Africa tops the list with Mexico and Costa Rica because they are developing countries. Whereas if you move towards developed countries such as Germany, Sweden, and France, they have hours which are probably about 25, 26 to 30 in a week. So the more developed countries are able to use this right because they are highly advanced and highly industrialized economies. Whereas in South Africa, there's long-standing fears about unemployment, there is rising inflation and slow economic growth, which means that people are essentially required to work longer hours. So those are the considerations which you must have in mind in thinking whether it's a viable solution for South Africa.
Let's have the conversation then with our listeners. You heard what Siphile had to say. Do you think that this kind of legislation would be practical in a country like South Africa? As an employer, as an employee, what are your views on this? On 011-714-2006, that's where I'll be taking your calls. Do you think it's time that, as workers, we're able to at least have entitlement to be able to disconnect from the office, disconnect and not be expected to be reached at all times of the day? You can send me your messages on 011-714-2006 and on the WhatsApp line it's 0614-104-107. Siphile, it's quite interesting. I was saying to the listeners earlier that it could well maybe seem viable in some sectors, but in others probably completely unreasonable. And I was using our sector, the media sector, as an example. I know that one of the first things I was told when I got my first job was that when we call, you answer. You make sure that you don't miss that call because you could be missing out on something big. Either there's a big breaking story that you need to be sent to, and if you're not available, then that is almost in breach of the contract that you have signed.
So yeah, that's quite true, Cathy. What people need to bear in mind, well, employers specifically, they should be mindful of the nature of the job and whether it requires availability after hours. Even in my profession, for instance, we ordinarily work after hours because the nature of the job requires it. But such expectations should be stated formally so that the employee is at least aware that they might be required to work or be available at least after hours, even though there isn't in the absence of an obligation to do so statutorily by law. So it is important for employers to make sure that the expectation is known, because that benefits the employee to know what is expected of them, and also the employer as well benefits in the process.
Let me go to Mark, who's calling us from Johannesburg. Mark, good morning.
Morning, Cathy.
Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment. All these laws go around employers this and employers that and employers. That's very much a one-sided approach. I'm an employee, not an employer. So it's not something that I'm trying to gain 30 points on. when it comes to that same thing of sending emails, the employee does exactly the same. You'll see, walk past somebody's desk, I'll give you an example. You see you're being sent an email at 10 o'clock in the morning. You're quite excited you're going to get an email. You carry on with your day, 12 o'clock comes, 3 o'clock comes, 5 o'clock comes, no email, you go home. 8 o'clock the morning, the evening, you get an email from that guy. He's only doing that because he's getting paid per hour. The theft of hours and the theft of work and the stuff that employers have to do in order to pay out and fork out, where the employee is not held accountable in the same action. I think we need to have a revamp on the whole industry as a whole as employee.
So basically, Mark, you're talking about some of the tricks that employees will come up with in order to try and get a little bit more money out of the system.
And it's geared up that way based on the privatization where somebody gets paid per hour and not a block sum to for a salary. Like I work for a salary, I don't get paid per hour. If I work 1 hour or I work 500 hours, I get the same salary. So it's my prerogative to finish my work within a week and not overtime. And it works vice versa. You also get employers that take advantage of the workers based on the fact that they know they get paid per hour. They send them work and they expect them to do work and not get paid for it. That part we all understand. And I think that's where the law came in. But the fact of the matter is it's a two-sided approach here, and the outcome is a one-sided approach.
Yeah. Mark, that's a very important point that you're raising. So, Spilly, let me come to you and talk about then, as Mark was saying, the person who writes the email at 10 but only sends it at 8 so they can bill for extra hours.
Yes, so I think, it always depends what are the expectations from the employee. If there's an employee who's getting billed per hour and they're trying to get their hours up, sending an employee who's not ordinarily required to work overtime, the employee who's being sent that email obviously would be within their bounds to reply the next morning if they aren't required to be working beyond their ordinary hours. So that is why the employers should definitely make it definitively clear in their employment contract when they hire employees that what the expectations are. So other employees might be overzealous and be willing to work beyond ordinary hours without any additional remuneration. Some might not. Some will say, I work 9 to 5, I don't get paid to work at 10 p.m. in the evening and I won't work. Well, that is fine, but only if the employment contract regulates that. So the starting point goes back to what regulates working hours in our country. So the Basic Conditions of Employment Act regulates that. And it provides protection to a certain group of employees who earn below the minimum earnings threshold. So once you earn above the threshold, which is currently set at 211,000 Rand, which is about 17,600 a month, once you earn above that amount of money, then you are not entitled to certain protection, which the BCA provides to employees who earn below that threshold. So the regulation of working hours is one of those provisions in the BCA which provides protection to employees who are seen as vulnerable. They are seen as vulnerable because they're not recognized as having sufficient bargaining power to negotiate vigorously with their employers regarding their terms and conditions of employment. So it's very important that the starting point relates to what are the terms and conditions on which you are employed. If you are an employee who is not required to work outside ordinary hours and the person sends you an email at 10 o'clock, then it's fine. It would be okay for you to respond in the morning at 8 because that's when you're required to be working. Whereas if you are required to be working beyond that time, then it might cause a problem for you as an employee.
All right. Siphile, we're going to continue our conversation in a moment. We're taking a quick break. I've got a lot more callers lined up for you.
Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM.
We continue the conversation on the talking point. Siphile Hlwatika is still on the line, and he's an associate, and he particularly deals with employment law, and we are looking at legislation that would help South Africans disconnect. We're seeing it in parts of Europe. Is it something we need to consider in South Africa as well? Basically, where you are unreachable outside of your your working hours to your office. Mandisa, you're calling us in Gauteng. Good morning.
Hi, Cathy.
Hi.
Very interesting subject. But I don't see it being practical in the types of contracts that we sign here in South Africa. For an example, the contract will say you are expected to work from 8 o'clock, as an example, to 5 o'clock. But then it will have a clause that says from time to time, you will be expected to work outside of these hours. And that just covers the from time to time emails that they will send you outside of working hours and expect you to respond to them promptly.
And I suppose,
I don't know if it will be practical here.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the things, Mandisa, in some industries is that the from time to time becomes an everyday thing, right? It's not just occasionally.
Cathy?
Yes, can you hear me, Mandisa?
Sorry, I'm on the road. I can hardly hear you.
So what I was saying is that the unfortunate thing is that in the from time to time that is included in the contract sometimes becomes an everyday occurrence, and so there's no, there's no framework that actually guides that.
Exactly. Because you will be told that it's on your contract. This is for the from time to time that we were referring to. And it happens also with job descriptions. The contract will say, this is your job description. And then it will say, and from time to time, you will be required to perform duties outside of this, not specified on your contract. So that on its own tells you that whatever your boss says you must do, you will have to do
whether you like it or not.
Exactly.
All right, Mandisa, thanks for the call. Mandisa,
All right. Thank you, Cathy.
in Gauteng. Okay, let me go to, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this name correctly. Boba Vane. You're calling us from Johannesburg. Please take me out of this misery. How do we pronounce your name?
Sorry, I can barely hear you, but if you can hear me, it's very simply Boudewijn.
Boudewijn.
Yes.
Ah, I see. Thank you so much for that, Boudewijn. Welcome to the show.
Sorry, say again. I can barely hear you.
I was saying welcome to the show.
Okay, thank you. I normally don't phone in, but I just was busy with something else. Your previous Jolene I wanted to speak to, but I thought I must just comment now, while I'm on it, that this whole new act and everything else, one has to be super careful that one doesn't create another department with Mercedes, BMWs, PAs, fancy officers, prestige, and all these things, because just now the one half of the country is meant to control the other half, all working from home, and who's actually going to do the work is the observation. Second observation, nobody should be in leadership in any position, from politics to anything, unless they have physically worked themselves and have learned on the job to be kind, ethical, morally upright to people who work for them. Then you don't need laws because people have it innate in themselves. That's my only comment.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that contribution out in Joburg there. So, Siphile, let me bring you in here and give you a chance again just to weigh in on some of what our listeners have been saying.
Well, the issue that the previous caller just mentioned now, it is important that there should be, employees should have good morale to work without having been regulated by laws. But because of, once again, the developmental nature of the country we live in, or its state rather, it requires to have certain laws in place to protect employees. Once again, the emphasis must be placed on the efforts which government has taken to put in place legislation to protect those employees whom it considers to be vulnerable. And those who are not vulnerable, who unfortunately earn above the threshold, are seen to be employees who are able to effectively negotiate their terms and conditions with their employers. So they have more bargaining power to negotiate the terms in which they are employed. Unfortunately, the employment contract is, after all, what regulates the employment relationship. I take note of the previous caller who had mentioned that employers in their contracts will tell you explicitly that you might be required to work from time to time after hours, but it happens on a frequent basis. It's more than time to time basis. But unfortunately, the employer's operations are what will demand how you should be working. So depending on the employer's operational requirements, that is essentially what's going to require you to work after hours or not.
I've got this message from Tabiso here in Kraaifontein, and it's an important one because he asks whether this is applicable to employers only, or rather to employees. If it's applicable to employers only, and are employees also not allowed to contact the employers during these disconnect hours. And he says he doesn't think it'll work in South Africa. For example, if there's an emergency over the weekend and he has to notify his employer that he won't be able to come to work, does it mean that he'll have to wait for Monday working hours to resume before he can do that? So in terms of how we are seeing it being applied in the European countries, how does it work from the employee perspective?
Well, in the European countries, like I referred to earlier on to the Irish Code of Good Practice, Code of Employers and Employees on the right to disconnect. The code is essentially focused on protecting employees. So if an employee, for instance, from the example you just provided now, if an employee cannot attend work, for instance, on a Monday, and they must notify their employer over the weekend that they cannot work, I don't see how the right would be applicable in that sense, because the employer expects you to notify them should you not be able to attend work. So there would be no prohibition on employees contacting employers, for instance, in the case of an emergency, like you put it, to the effect that you cannot attend work on the Monday. There is no prohibition in that respect. The essential focus of the right is to protect employees as opposed to employers from being contacted.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on to the show today, Siphile Hlwatika, who is an associate at ENS Africa's Employment Department, specializing in employment law.